welcome to BWTV's coverage of the midterm 22 elections. I'm here joined with the BW Exponent student newspaper contributors Simon Skutas and Chris Moran. We're going to be talking about the statewide races as well as the local angle. I'd like to get started with the Governor of Ohio race. We have the candidates of Nan Whaley, the Democrat, as well as Mike DeWine, the Republican, who is our current governor. We see a couple of topics in this race, and I'd love for one of you to let me know about your thoughts on the guns and abortions and education issues.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. So in this governor race, we've got Nan Whaley versus Mike DeWine, Mike DeWine being the Republican incumbent. And so it's important here because Nan Whaley has a lot of focus in her campaign on the abortion issue, especially after the Dobbs v. Jackson decision. She's made that one of her main focuses of her campaign. DeWine has passed some controversial legislation when it comes to guns and abortion. As far as abortion goes, he passed a heartbeat bill, the heartbeat bill, where around 6 weeks, abortion becomes illegal whenever a fetal heartbeat is detected. So Nan Whaley has criticized him for this. Of course, the bill right now is frozen, I believe. As far as gun legislation goes, I guess we can elaborate on that as well. Mike DeWine has passed a couple of things. Probably most importantly is the permitless carry, which previously in Ohio you had to have a license in order to concealed carry handguns. This is not the case anymore because of the permitless carry legislation that Mike DeWine passed, also criticized by Nan Whaley. But Nan Whaley has not performed very well in the polls, as a lot of people have noticed. If you want to elaborate on how she's done in polling, Simon.
Yeah, basically this whole time she's been at least in the double digits down from DeWine. That's maintained the whole time. But another one of the issues here that I think is important to point out is one of the things that DeWine did when it came to health care. And then he signed into law a bill that allowed healthcare professionals to not offer healthcare services on the basis of things like religion. That's just one of the things that's received criticism. One of the things that might be playing a part in this election, although despite, as you said, the polls are showing quite a difference with Nan Whaley and DeWine there.
Yeah.
And another thing that DeWine had also passed was arming of teachers. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's something about that as well. I mean, then this goes into what's happened in Mike DeWine's administration is a lot of the legislation for guns has been very, very liberalized. Not in the sense of being liberal like Democrat, but liberal like the restrictions have been significantly loosened, and that is one of the things that we see is the arming of teachers legislation.
And we do see a lot of these political themes across both the state as well as local angle. And moving on to the U.S. Senate with candidates Representative Tim Ryan, Democrat, as well as J.D. Vance, Republican. I'd love to hear your experience going to the debate for these U.S. Senate candidates.
You want to get started on that one, Simon?
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting debate. We were going in with some research on what these candidates had been saying in the past. When we got to the debate, we started to notice that they started moderating their stances throughout this. And this is a pretty common thing that we see from the transition from a primary election to the midterm election. They try to moderate their stances, appeal to people across the aisle and people who are still undecided.
Yeah, so we see that in a lot of elections where in the primaries there are less people that vote, more partisan people are the ones that are voting, and as the election goes on, generally speaking, the candidates will moderate their stances because they don't have those extreme partisans voting. Rather, it's the general public and moderates that they're trying to appeal to, because that's how people win elections, is by appealing to people that are moderates.
Yes, and there was a little bit of there was a lead, and then it changed that the points of these candidates had, kind of tipped the scale. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
I'm sorry.
There was a 4-point lead over Vance, and then it led to a 5-point lead over Ryan. And so we've seen a lot of changes with this race.
Yeah, that's been interesting. They've been pretty neck and neck throughout this, despite having the 4 or 5 point lead. What we've been seeing is that it's been within the margin of error when they've been conducting polling. Baldwin Wallace specifically conducted a poll. Recently, they were able to see that Tim Ryan was ahead of J.D. Vance, but that was, again, within the margin of error. But another kind of interesting thing we've been seeing, it happened with the 2016 2020 presidential race, 2016 presidential race, is we're seeing Republicans being less likely to filling out the polls. And this is making the polling information be a little bit different when the time comes for the election to actually come to fruition.
Yeah, and that's right. In both 2016 and 2020, Trump supporters were less likely to participate in polling for whatever reason that may be. It's really making polling difficult in recent years. So.
And going on to the Ohio Secretary of State, speaking of the elections, there was a lot of talk of election fraud as a theme. Can you speak a little bit more onto that, as well as the candidates Frank LaRose, Republican, Terpshore Maras, the Independent, and Chelsea Clark, the Democrat candidate?
Yeah, so it's important to note when we're talking about the Secretary of State that election integrity is like one of their main jobs. So Tori Mars in particular, I guess we'll start with her. She's an independent. There's been a lot of difficulty with her actually trying to be able to run for Secretary of State. I believe there's a series of court cases in Ohio courts where there was an attempt to actually block her from running. That controversy was overcome and she was allowed to run as an independent. She has some associations with the QAnon conspiracy group, a lot of people say. But even, and she believes in election fraud in the 2020 election, but even the more mainstream candidate, Frank LaRose, our current Secretary of State, the Republican, he also has said some things about how it kind of suggests that he might believe in election fraud to some degree himself. And of course, Chelsea Clark is something notable here, the Democrat in this race, has more of a focus, if you look at her campaign website, on potential foreign meddling in elections, which is kind of a throwback to the 2016 election where Democrats were talking about maybe the Russians were meddling in the election. So you notice that pattern there, that Republicans and the independent Tori Mars talking about election fraud maybe in the 2020 election, and in kind of a similar light, the Democrats talking about foreign meddling.
And Chelsea Clark, one of the things that she says on her campaign donation website is that she will fight like hell against the GOP who are actively sabotaging voter rights. And, you know, one of the things is addressing voter suppression and, you know, all of these different issues with voting. So how do you see that these candidates are addressing this?
That's a pretty interesting, that's an interesting question. What we're able to see here is specifically with Frank LaRose, the one way he's handling voter rights, and he's been receiving a lot of criticism for it. He supports the ballot initiative, issue 2, that specifically deals with these voting rights. And one of the specific criticisms of it is that it's going to bar 17-year-olds the right to vote. And another criticism that's often made of it is that it requires too long of a time for people to have to register to vote before they're allowed to. It requires a 30-day registration.
Yeah, so Republicans have been getting a lot of criticism in recent years over how they handle voter rights, because there is a lot of talk of mandatory voter ID laws which require people to take IDs to the polls, and this is a nationwide issue that people talk about across the country. So yeah.
And there's also been some controversial ties with Maras, the podcast host, with QAnon, is that right?
Yeah, I mentioned that. QAnon, it's a conspiracy organization that's involved with, they're Trump supporters, and there's a lot to that. Yeah, Tori Mars is associated with them. I don't know a whole lot about it, but yes, there is an association there.
And moving on to a more local angle, you also attended the debate for the Cuyahoga County Executive. I'd love to hear more about your experience.
Yeah, it was an interesting time there. One thing we were seeing is the economy was a huge focus for both of them. It was basically dealing with how they're going to end up spending. But one of the major contentions here is that Chris Ronayne, being the Democrat, he's running in one of the most Democratic counties in Ohio. Plain Dealer found that they are the most Democratic county in Ohio when considering the past 6 presidential elections. You want to talk a little bit more?
Yeah, so we went to this Chris Ronayne debate, and it really shows that you know, he is the Democrat candidate. Like Simon just said, Cuyahoga County is like one of the most Democratic counties in Ohio. And I mean, you could see it when we were at the City Club debate. there was more applause for Chris Ronayne when he was saying things. You could feel it in the room. There was a little bit less enthusiasm about Lee Weingart, but yes, that was kind of an interesting phenomenon there.
Yeah, one of the things that has been getting a little bit of enthusiasm behind Lee Weingart, though, is the way that he's going about handling taxation. So he wants to get rid of the Regional Income Tax Agency, which handles different taxation for different parts of the county, and he wants to make a whole unified tax for the county. And he also wants to freeze property taxes for senior citizens. So it's just two things there where he's kind of in opposition to Ronayne there.
Yeah.
And there's also been plans for a new jail in Cuyahoga County. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's been something that they've been considering for a really long time here. What are they going to do about the new jail? There's a lot of problems going on with the current jail that they've been finding out. They have two different routes of wanting to handle this. So they both want to go about getting a new jail system. Lee Weingart wants to go about getting smaller jails, whereas Ronayne wants to improve the current jail and then look forward to a new location for a whole completely new jail.
And going back to the local angle of elections, the issue 2, amending the Ohio Constitution to bar non-U.S. citizens from voting in local elections. Can you speak a little bit on that, of how this how they were not legally approved to vote in state elections?
Do you want to say something about this, Simon?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, current Ohio Constitution, apparently it's a little bit lucid on whether or not non-citizens are able to vote in local elections. And the reason that this issue 2 is coming about is because the village of Yellow Springs in Greene County, they let non-citizens vote just so long as they were residents of Village Green. And Frank LaRose kind of went after that there. Made sure this isn't going to happen. As I already mentioned, Frank LaRose is for issue 2. He's for not allowing non-citizens to vote in these local elections.
Yes, and Berea, where Baldwin Wallace University is located, Berea's charter already requires voters in municipal elections to be citizens. So we definitely see how a lot of these issues are affecting communities from both the state to the local angle. And speaking of Berea, some of the ballot initiatives that are on the ballot this year for our midterm elections is tax levies. So the Berea tax levy specifically, if you would like to talk about that in regards to the water.
Yeah, so they want to improve the water system, water plant. The last election, this passed by a super huge margin, 2017. It gets renewed every 5 years here. I don't know whether or not it's expected to happen again, but it's to improve the water plant that provides all the water to the city of Berea. It's also to improve other general water facilities.
And if approved, the tax will be renewed for 5 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. And speaking about tax levies and renewals, the Cleveland Metro Parks, their tax levy is requesting an increase of 27 cents for each $100 of property evaluation. I'd love to hear more about this topic, as you know, Cleveland Metro Parks are one of the gems of Cleveland.
Yeah, we've got all kinds of metro parks around here. We're literally right next to Baldwin Wallace. We have some. And I guess I don't know a whole lot of specifics on the matter, but it's going to be increasing the amount of funding that we have for the metro parks if this passes.
To maintain both the Cleveland Metro Parks as well as the Zoo of Cleveland.
Yes.
And funds would also be allocated to maintain, repair, and improve these parks, and plan and acquire and develop and protect and promote the use of existing and future lands for facilities. So it's great to see these issues on the ballot so that we can preserve the gems of our community. And I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on how a lot of these political issues or themes are being seen at both the state level as well as the local level. And what do you think candidates are doing or not doing, or what they could do in order to address some of these important topics?
Well, I can't really speak to how I think that politicians should handle the issues. But as far as what issues are important, I mean, really we're noticing abortion being one of the more important issues. After the Dobbs v. Jackson decision, which happened, kind of overturning the Roe v. Wade, it created a lot of focus on finding a workaround to make abortion legal in other ways. So some politicians, Democrat politicians, have been talking about codifying Roe v. Wade, codifying legal abortions nationwide in Congress. And this has been important in more than just Congress, but of course it's come up in the Senate race and the gubernatorial race in Ohio. If you want to continue with some of this, Simon.
Yeah, so not with that specific issue, but as we were talking about earlier, the LGBTQ plus rights, that's something that's happening both at the federal and state level. We mentioned earlier DeWine's the healthcare professionals now having the choice, I guess, to deny services to certain individuals. But what we also saw when we were at the J.D. Vance and what we saw in looking into the J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan situation, we saw a video of J.D. Vance specifically in an interview with Tucker Carlson referring to teachers pushing transgender ideas onto students as crazy lunatics, and that this is, kind of where these ideas are coming from. So I guess that's where you see a difference happen at the state and federal level on this exact issue.
Yep.
We definitely see a lot of diversity issues being addressed at both the state and local level, and it's definitely why it's important to make sure everybody gets to the polls this year and votes for the midterms. And in regards to your experiences overall exploring, this theme of politics at both the state level and the local level, can you tell me a little bit more about your interests and how you got into this area, and if you have any plans in your future careers of going further into this area?
Yeah, so me personally, I mean, I'm a political science major, so is Simon. And we kind of got into this. So neither of us were initially into journalism, but we both joined the Exponent. I joined the Exponent because of Simon, actually. And we got these really cool opportunities to go to these debates. We went to the Lee Weingarten and Chris Ronayne debate at the City Club in downtown Cleveland. And we also went to the J.D. Vance, Tim Ryan debate, which is at the Fox 8 studio. Simon set us up with both of those. Really great opportunity. Yeah, I think, neither of us initially wanted to do journalism as like the thing that we were going to do for our career, but it's really provided a lot of cool opportunities for, being in the political sphere, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really has. Getting into these opportunities, it's not as difficult as we'd expect either. A lot of these places are really ecstatic to have us. Like City Club, they were really excited to have us covering the debate there with Chris Ronayne and Lee Weingarten. Fox 8, that was also, we just had to reach out and we were able to get ourselves in there.
Yeah, it is surprisingly easy to get into these things, is what we found out.
Yeah.
Well, what a great opportunity, while you're still at university studying political science. And it's great to see the Baldwin Wallace University student newspaper allow so much enrichment in your careers so early on. And obviously there are so many important issues here that we've discussed and that a lot of voters in our community are concerned with, that we encourage everybody to go out and vote this year. The midterm elections are very important, and it's not too late to make your plans to vote in the midterms. Whether you're voting absentee or in person, the Baldwin Wallace University Exponent, which is the student newspaper once again, has an online guide to all the last-minute steps you need to make your voice heard this November. So you can visit www.bwexponent.com/midterms, and I just appreciate your time and everybody's insights today. And I would love to hear one last thing of what your favorite part of this experience has been, as doing investigative journalism with the Baldwin Wallace Exponent.
I think my favorite part was, we both got to go into the spin room at the Fox 8 studio, which was really cool. You always see in press conferences and stuff like this on TV, and that's exactly what it felt like. We walked in this room, it's crowded with journalists and camera equipment and stuff like that, and we are frankly, we're pretty inexperienced. We didn't know what to do. We went and stole a seat quick, not literally stole, but you know what I mean. And we sat down, and I got to ask a question of Tim Ryan, and and look, J.D. Vance didn't come into the spin room himself, but he sent in, I think it was his campaign manager, some fellow from his campaign. So I got to ask a question of both of them. Me and Simon both worked together on making the questions. Just a really exhilarating experience. So it's strange to see things on TV and then you're kind of living it at one point. So,
Yeah. Along with those doing things like that. I think the working on the articles afterwards is always a lot of fun for us. Immediately after we came home from that debate, we sat in the newsroom, we worked on this article until about 3 a.m. We had a really good time doing it. We really liked the process of going through these things.
You felt the media buzz, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to remind everybody viewing this program once again that it's not too late to make your plans to vote in the midterms, and please check out the online guide that the Exponent has so wonderfully prepared for everybody at www.bwexponent.com/midterms. Voting is so important. Please exercise your right to vote and get to the polls this year for the midterm elections. It will be an important one, and we just want to thank you for being with us today. That's all the time that we have for today. Thank you. And thank you to our guests, Simon Skutas and Chris Moran.